Press. Right, just pressing record as we jump in. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you. All right, I'm going to keep on admitting some folks, but as we are gathering for this conversation, I'd love to just toss out a check-in question for us. Maybe you would just respond in the chat box as you feel led. What's something fun for you in this midsummer month? Just what's something that you're finding fun, something you're finding enjoyable, whether it's churchy or not? Maybe if you would put your location in the chat box if you'd like respond to that question. Oh my gosh, Rachel, are maple creamies? Is that a Vermont thing? Is that like a maple syrup part of the world thing? It sounds amazing.
Yep, absolutely. It's the best.
No, backyard.
Iowa high intensity gardening, fresh fruits. Oh, these are great.
I just looked up a maple creamy and now I want one.
Is it like a sandwich? Like a cookie sandwich? What is it? No, it's ice cream.
It's like soft serve, right?
Yeah, it's like soft serve ice cream. It's the best.
With like graham crackers crumbled on top or something?
That can happen. That can happen. You can also put hot fudge on it. Hot fudge is not a bad idea. It's just a nice time.
Okay.
Maple syrup.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Hey, it's good to see you all. It's a hot July afternoon here in Alabama. And I'm glad there's some things that are keeping you entertained and having fun. We are hosting this. This is our regularly scheduled third Thursday. This is third Thursday, right? Yes.
Yeah.
I'm getting all confused in these summer months. We also have a regularly scheduled second Tuesday Zoom call. This is the third Thursday Zoom call. And we're about 3 weeks post General Convention. And so we thought we would take this time to have some conversation, hear a little bit about what happened at General Convention, all the resolutions and elections and conversations, particularly the ones that concern this work of missional leadership and church planting and redevelopment. And to help get us started, we brought a friend. Reverend Tim Baer is a friend of mine from VTS. He's also been a longtime church planting colleague and friend and mentor. He planted a church that just hosted our last Genesis gathering right outside of Oklahoma City in that diocese, and was also involved in the Legislative Committee on Evangelism and the Future Church as I forget exactly what it's called, but it's like the dispatch person, right?
Right. Yes.
So you know all kinds of the ins and outs of what was going on. And before I turn it over to you, Tim, to get us started, Tom, was there anything else you'd add to that introduction or the purpose of what we're hoping for today?
No, so many of you have partnered with us in ministries across the church, and we have been able to come alongside your diocesan leadership teams to support the ministries that you're leading, guiding, launching. That will continue. So a lot of what we came away from General Convention will continue to support the work that we're doing, and we want to just share with you some of the details. So the overall is your participation in this larger network, this community, is paying off. There's some really beautiful fruit that's about to mature here, and that's what we're here to talk about today. So thank you for being here. Back to you, Katie.
I would also just add, before Tim takes it away, that Some of you might be here hopeful to hear something about church planting and redevelopment grants, and there's still fuzziness around that, but we will get to it. So we'll try to address that a little bit before the end of the hour. But we're not going to start there. I think we're going to start with some bigger picture kind of reflections and dreams. So Tim, over to you.
Okay, well, thanks for having me. I'm looking down, and several of you are at General Convention and involved in some of these different committees as well. So you may have some things to add afterwards. So this was my fourth General Convention. I was way back in 2003. Was on the official youth presence as a 18-year-old into a really pretty amazing and a little bit controversial General Convention. And then I've been in 06 as a lay deputy, and then I volunteered in 09, and then because I was in seminary in that time, and then the last two I've been to. And so just over the last 20 years, like General Convention has changed a lot, and in some really good ways, and I think probably more to come. But this General Convention, I thought I'd just start with a couple big picture, just reflections. This General Convention, more than any else that I've been to, felt very unified and very respectful, even amongst the diversity within our churches. You know, some of our more conservative clergy that were there, and I felt like we're listened to and respected and participated, and are more progressive, which is now, you know, the vast majority of the church obviously listened and cared. I felt like everyone felt cared for, and there was a generosity of spirit, and some of the resolutions that were passed kind of helped fit with that. But everyone at General Convention, I just felt a great sense of love for the church and for the mission and ministry of the church, for the gospel, and that was really refreshing, and just made me feel really hopeful and good for the church at large. So I hope others had that experience too if you were there. And then 2 years ago at General Convention, it was the COVID convention, and so it was truncated, and we were moving very fast pace and didn't have a lot of conversations, but I felt like I heard no conversation at all except for the State of the Church Committee's report about the sense of awareness of just where the church at large was and some of the challenges facing a lot of our congregations and dioceses. I felt like that was a little bit of the head in the sand convention as far as thinking about redevelopment and church planting and just the decline of membership, and all these things. And some of that is just because of the reactivity coming out of COVID and being in the midst of COVID still. But I felt like that was a big departure from this convention, where I heard a lot of people talking about where are we going as a denomination, and what does the future of the church hold? I started hearing that whenever I was in Committee 9. That was the committee that I served on dispatch for, which is the Church Planting and Evangelism Committee. Because when we first started having our meetings, we were talking about some of these things, so much so that a couple of us peeled away and wrote a resolution about like property development and what we could do, how we could help kind of resource the church, bring together some different parties, having the conversations around property development and being good stewards of our properties, and how to be entrepreneurial with our spaces to generate revenue for mission and ministry. And so that was a resolution that got lumped into one of the three that I'll talk about. Committee 9 also put forward a resolution. I honestly can't remember what ended up happening with it. Isaac Martinez is on vacation. He was the one that helped kind of write that one. But it was kind of about trying to create some sort of accountability, or at least awareness of how many dioceses are in decline numerically, and having dioceses put together some sort of at least statement about how they're trying to address that. And I think that one ended up getting tabled, but there was conversation in our committee certainly around these issues that our churches are facing nationwide. And then for Committee 8, which is Congregational Vitality and Data-Driven Initiatives, as soon as we got to convention, I started working with them because I brought this resolution about property development to them, which was DO44. And we started combining several resolutions into what became AO44, which I'll talk about more in a second. But I got this big sense from their committee that they wanted to address these issues and talking about redevelopment and kind of facing some of the challenges of decline and really being constructive about what this meant for our future mission and ministry across the church. And so those two committees, 8 and 9, is where I spent the most of my time at General Convention. Lots of other really important things. But certainly for this group, those two committees' work is probably the most important. Committee 9 was what I served as dispatch for. And that's the church planting and the Church Planting and Evangelism Committee. And we spent some time there having a little listening session and some kind of group sharing about what different people were doing in church planting and redevelopment in their areas. And I think that was something that usually doesn't happen at General Convention. We usually don't share stories and like harvest stories and learnings and where God is at work in people's lives. And so that was really awesome to use one of our committee times or one of our hearings for that kind of work. And then they passed two resolutions that came out of the task force for is it the task force for church planting and evangelism? Is that the title of it, Katie? And they're the ones that work with you and Tom, that task force. And so they put forward those two resolutions. And AO45 was a resolution that really kind of continues on the work of church planting that we're already doing. It reestablished a task force for another triennium. It put, which kind of serves as an advisory group. I think it's called an advisory group instead of a task force, actually. But that helps with like the grants and helps work with you all as staff. And so that resolution kind of keeps that work going so that there's a kind of pool of leaders in the church beyond just the three of you in that office of church planning and redevelopment to kind of help with some of the work. It called on the executive council to look into forming kind of an endowment for church planting, which is an awesome and kind of creative and needed idea down the line. And whether we could use some of the tech endowment for that or establish another endowment or what that might look like. And so that's like an idea for future conversation. That resolution kind of encourages kind of the cohorts and provides money for the cohorts and the training groups and things like that. And it called on the advisory group and the church to kind of continue to prioritize underrepresented groups in the church as we think about AO46 is kind of the redevelopment resolution that came out of the task force. And so it is really focused on existing churches and calling us to kind of invest some money in kind of building multicultural ministries in existing congregations, kind of as part of our redevelopment plans. We're looking at neighborhoods that are changing and things like that. And so it provides some money and resources for that work and outlined that in their resolution. And both of those resolutions, both the budgets for them the line items were already in the church's budget when we went into convention. And so both of those resolutions got passed on the consent calendar. So they were talked about in hearings, but not talked about on the floor of the house either house really, because of the volume of resolutions. And so we didn't get to talk about them much on the floor, but we know that they're priorities for the church. They're already in the budget. And so we were glad that we could pass them easily. AO44 is a really interesting resolution. So this went through Committee 8 and Committee 8 kind of calls this one lovingly the omnibus resolution because they took 3 resolutions, an original AO44, the DO44, a couple colleagues and I wrote, and then another resolution, which I can't even remember its number anymore. And for several days, we worked to like create this really long resolution, which is AO44. And if you want to read the whole thing, you can go to vbinder.net and search for it. Here, actually, I'll put it in the chat. It's really long, and this is kind of the truth-telling resolution of like, and here we are in the church, and we're facing these issues. And what's interesting about this resolution is, in part because they combine 3, it doesn't have as many very clear asks as what I might have liked, but it really names the priority that we are aware of decline and the need for redevelopment and new vitality and for church planting and all these things, and to be creative stewards of our assets and our resources, of which are plentiful. I mean, our denomination as a whole has billions of dollars in resources. We do not have a lack of resources. We do have a lack of creativity, and we have some structures that are perhaps impairing some of our creativity. And then we do have some legal responsibilities and constrictions that are very real as part of that too, of course. But we've got an enormous amount of resources, and we need to leverage those for mission and ministry. And at 2 years ago at General Convention, we got rid of program budget and finance. And at least in the last few conventions, we haven't operated like this. But it used to be that, like my first several conventions, near the beginning of each convention, we would pass a resolution that named the budget priorities for the next triennium. And then that would go to PB&F, and they would work with the resolutions coming in and the budget draft, and they would work to massage it all to make it align with those budget priorities. And AO44, in my mind, was an attempt from the committee and the various resolutions to say, listen, redevelopment and thinking missionally, thinking about resources has to be the top priority for the church in the future. And it's an attempt to kind of say that. And then it really challenges the presiding bishop and the president of the House of Deputies through the structures of the church as they are right now to really focus on this as the big priority in the next several triennium, really, because this is not short-term work. And so there's not a lot of super specific asks about it, but there are some ideas and there are some directions that it kind of points us towards. Not only harvesting success stories and learnings, but also thinking about properties and assets and thinking about how we can partner with some of our parachurch organizations to better do some of that work. That's kind of a brief summary of AO44. It is an omnibus, a little bit of a wish list kind of resolution, but it's to really name the priority and the need within the church. So I think it's really important for that. And it kind of gives some direction for our presiding officers and our executive council to be thinking about these things. We're of course doing all that work before the presiding bishop was elected. And so honestly, like, I feel like Bishop Rowe wants to focus on these areas already. And so I think it's kind of an exciting time for the church. And I'm excited to see some of the work kind of be done over the next couple trienniums, because I think there's a lot to do. But I think we have a good awareness of what some of the needs are. And so I left feeling pretty kind of optimistic, hopeful, and excited for the future. So.
Thank you, Tim. Wow. I know there's probably some questions, and I know that we also want to talk a little bit about hopes for the future, but Tom, you said you got all kinds of questions. Would you like to start?
I do. But before I do, as questions occur to you, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them in the order in which you enter them. Several of you were there also, and you participated in these hearings, and we would love to hear your perspectives as well. Eric, I had texted you and asked if you were going to be here because we'd love to hear how this came through for you too. You know, some of us have given our lives to launching new ministries that engage those historically underrepresented in the Episcopal Church. That's a pretty broad swath of people here in our US cultures. And I know some of you are just really deeply committed to that work. In the past, I've described the Episcopal Church as primarily two groups of people. One is standing in the circle, facing inward, deeply concerned about the future of the institution. And then there are some of us who are standing at the outer edges of that circle, but we're facing outward, wondering how we convey our best gifts to a world that is so hungry to receive them. And I know a goodly number of you on today's session number in that. And Tim, I know that includes you as well. Did you feel as though you had a lot of colleagues supporting your perspective as a church planter there at this General Convention 81? Tim, that's for you.
Sure. Yeah, I do. I think in the church at large, well, maybe it's just the people I talk to, but I felt like there's a great awareness and respect for church planters in the church, and that people know there's a need and that we need to be doing this work. So I did get that sense in my experience there. Yeah.
And a goodly number of the people on today's session have either received funding in past or have applied for funding in the past and are still hoping that somehow we might partner. I wonder, what's your sense of the funding made available through the resolutions for church planting or ministry innovation particularly, Tim?
Well, I still think it's small. Yeah, I think another resolution. I was part of a little minority group that wanted to raise the question of what our budget really looks like, and so we put forward a resolution to kind of lower the assessment from diocese to tech, which would dramatically reshape the budget, in an attempt to say we need to dramatically reshape our structures. And I think a lot of dioceses struggle to have the money to help create the match that is necessary in the partnership between tech grants and what they need on the local level in order to really make revitalizations and restarts, redevelopments, and church plants go and be successful. And so I think we have to really think about how the resources of the church kind of distributed towards that. And so I'll be curious to see what Bishop Rowe, where he wants to direct the church in the future for that. But I do think that our tech budget is there to help us do things that we can't do necessarily just with the diocese. And so I would love to see us restructure our budget in such a way that we had like 4 times the amount of grant money to go out. This is in one of my ambitious hopes that I have for the future that Katie asked me to come up with. So I can say that a little later if you want. But no, I don't think there's enough. I don't think there's enough money in the budget for this kind of work yet. But there is somewhat of an awareness that we probably need to invest more, but we'll see what happens with the structures over time.
Thank you. Teresa, you put a great comment in here. We can talk about your comment right now because you're not specifically talking about specific amounts as much as the way by which we discern how to fund ministry. Do you want to say more about your comment?
Yeah, I mean, I've heard that we will run out of people before we run out of money as an institution. So that's a broad statement, but I mean, shame on us if we haven't leveraged all the resources of the church And I haven't been close to the resolutions at all, so I can't say I followed it. It feels like we're locked down. Like, for example, I'm having this idea that in our community that is, boarded up houses up and down the street, we could partner with a group to maybe find actually a locale for us to reside in, but do it in a way that includes the community. Now, I know we have to be funding ourselves and we're working on that, but like maybe some things that could help with some infrastructure, permanent infrastructure or things like that. And I don't know where to go for building funds or building grants and things like that. I'm not talking huge dollars either. That's just one idea, like, or a little more seed money to leverage as we go out and continue to fundraise, things like that. And I think that it's like saving for your leaving money for your future generations and having so much perhaps that we never even really use it or see it because you're so concerned about something that's not before you right now.
That's good. Thank you, Teresa. Thank you
Sure,
for
thank
naming
you.
that. I think that there are a lot of us hungry for more of that conversation, and it might be a good moment to explain how we go from here. Since 2009, my first general convention, while in this position, I've been slowly learning not only the basic structure, but all the variations on that process for releasing grant funds. So what happens from here is we do have funded resolutions, which include money for grants. And none of that will be activated until the first of this next year, 2025. Between now and then, the president of the House of Deputies and the presiding bishop agree on members for each of the advisory groups that will oversee grant applications. And once those people are selected, they're invited to come together either by Zoom or in person. And what they do is they review the criteria for the grants. They verify that they like the application for grant funding. They set up a calendar for reviewing the grant funds, going to Executive Council for final approval, and then broadcasting who did and did not receive the funding that was applied for. So typically that is at the very earliest, sometime January to March 2025, with lots of steps between here and there. So I noticed somebody in the chat asked, the Episcopal Church in Minnesota asked, anyone with any links to grants for new Christian communities, kindly share. We'll have those to share with you, but we don't have them yet. We know that the money will be coming, but the process for reviewing grant applications hasn't been put in place yet. Same thing's true for redevelopment funding as well. Does that make sense? So any questions? Eric, thank you for emphasizing Teresa's quote. Eric, anything you want to add? You've been a part of this process for a long time as well, specifically around your sense of the church's will and commitment to support new ministries that engage those whom we have not been engaging. Eric, you want to add anything to what Tim has already said?
Thank you, Tom, for inviting me in the conversation. Hello, Saints. I'm Eric Metoyer from Diocese of California. Tom and Katie and Steve and I have known each other for, let's say, a while. So we don't give away the ages, but the gray and the beard will probably do that for me. There is more conversation than we had before. What I would like to see more is that this conversation never makes it to the convention floor. And that is always disappointing. Tim, thank you for that great work and being our liaison with Committee 9. I think the most important, most exciting things that happened were in the conversations in the committee rooms of 8 and 9 during convention, where individuals from across the church were invited into the rooms at 7 in the morning, 9 in the morning, to talk about what are your visions of the church. But because of the way the convention was built, more of that went on the consent calendar for the church nerds and the parliamentary nerds out there. That means these were up-down votes that were not discussed on the floor. And that was my great disappointment, that as important as we are having these discussions here and in some dioceses and in some other rooms in the church, they're not conversations that are across the wider church. And one of the things that came out, as Tim pointed out, was drafting a resolution of how to access more, how to get a knowledge base, at least, of accessing resources of what to do with. We have church property, we have schools, we have rectories, we have churches themselves that may be underutilized or closing, and we don't have a church-wide group that we can turn to say what to do best with this. Instead, we're using our own resources, which may be incredibly strong in some dioceses and may be incredibly weak in other dioceses, meaning we know actual developers and planters versus going to our friend who's got a couple of friends who have real estate licenses and can tell us best how to sell property. And Tom, I know I'm kind of drifting from the conversation, from that part of the conversation, but I'm hoping as we go into this next triennium and with Genesis is how to best support not only the church plants that we have going on, but to encourage building more church plants, how to encourage building more saints, but reflecting the communities and the cultures that we're working with now, instead of some sense of maintaining the glorious past that we might have had once. And even more so, how we support each other. What I so appreciate of working with Tom, Katie, and Steve, as they've been able to talk about these resources and consistently for many years to help guide us, but how much of that work are you being supported? And that's what I'd like for wherever we are to raise that up with our bishops and our own church hierarchy to say this work needs to be supported church-wide as well as diocesan-wide. We can't just look solely in our backyards, but we have to look connecting one another to share ideas, to share best practices, to share worst practices, because it also helps to know what didn't work, friends. And if it didn't work, we're probably not alone in this. But that itself is encouraging. I look forward to doing more of this work. And in Diocese of California, I see a few of my colleagues. I know that church vitality is getting to be a stronger conversation in our diocese, and I look forward that spreads into other dioceses. So here ended the lessons.
Oh, Eric, thank you. This is lovely. I want to remind you to text your questions and comments to us in the chat so we can make sure we include yours. And Regina, I know you have a follow-up on Eric's comments. Do you want to unmute and name that right now?
Yeah.
And as soon as you're finished, Regina, we're going to go back to Tim to ask him for a little bit more of his perspective. But right now, Regina.
Sure. Thank you. And thanks, Eric. It's great to hear that word. Something that I've talked a little bit about with Katie and Isaac Martinez. I'm in Diocese of Massachusetts, so very close to Isaac, is this sense of a lot of this work, as important as it is to have it in our labyrinthine legislative structure that, as Bishop Rowe said, is about to collapse under its own weight. I think part of the problem is there's not really much of a conversation about these issues and the things that Eric named outside of our legislative structure. So I'm not currently a church planter. Maybe someday I will be, but Isaac Martinez is the only church planter in our diocese that I know of right now. And I've become really aware of how negative it is that there's such a lack of other people who know about church planting or support church planting in our diocese. There's very few people to advocate for Isaac, to advocate for new things, to advocate for things like transparency when a church closes and that funding becomes available when a building is sold. that just is often dumped right into the operating expenses of the diocese, and it's not put towards new ministry. And so I've been thinking about how change has tended to happen in the 20th century in the Episcopal Church. And I've noticed that there's often independent grassroots advocacy groups that have folks that are connected to that legislative process, but they are doing other things. So, integrity is a great example of that. And now Trans-Episcopal is a great example of that. There's also a civil rights one way back that has an sort of a acronym that I always forget, that was focused on civil rights it was focused on congregations that were segregated. So just very narrowly focused on a change within the Episcopal Church. And so I'm getting interested in, like, how do we have this, we're constantly trying to go through the legislative stuff. We obviously have to keep doing that. How do we expand that into a group like that? And I've made up there's no group yet, but I made up a name for one in case there ever was, which is Episcopal Evolve. Because it's clear. It's also better, the other choice is Episcopal Extinction, right? We have two choices. So let's choose Evolve. So could there be a way, and I see that as having, like, part of its education, people don't know what's going on. And I heard that in Tim's comments of, like, the previous General Convention, people's heads really being in the sand. Part of it is helping people know what's going on. Part of it is imagining and having these conversations. And part of it is legislative. And Trans-Episcopal is a great model of that. So that's a lot. But I just want to lob that out there that this legislative stuff is so important, but maybe in this triennium, building this grassroots group that is not dependent on all the vagaries of our process, but we can just do stuff because we're Christians and we're baptized, and we can just make stuff happen in the world apart from general.
Nicely said. So I need to highlight, in response to you, Regina, just so there's such beautiful hope on the horizon here. We do have several grassroots groups growing and coming up out of that. One of them is called Practicing Possibilities, coming soon to a neighborhood near you. Week of Halloween, we have a focus on Province 1 people coming together. We'll make sure you get an invitation to that. We're holding out space for Province 1 first, and then if there are any extra spaces, we'll invite people from elsewhere in the country to come together. But the Living Waters Collective is doing very similar work as well, and we have some representatives of that movement here, very much a self-organizing group. But let me offer a third before we turn back to Tim. And you sort of touched on it, Eric touched on it as well, and that is, in the mid-20th century, Hermann Hesse, which many of us know for other writings, he wrote a little book called Journey to the East, in which he claims it is the hearers that make the prophet, that we actually shape our leaders and the way they conduct themselves in the world. So I want to offer a daring word, and that is that each of us, in our own grace-filled ways, learns to hold our bishops accountable, to be good stewards of the stories by which we illustrate what God is doing in our context. We need to do that work for the next 3 years, such that when we come together for our next General Convention, we have these conversations on the floor, in open conversation, public conversation, that they are story-based, not theory-based or good idea-based, but that they are based in real-time experiences that lend people the courage to take wise action as well. That's work we each can do. We don't need a resolution or funding for that. We just need to speak up and say the truth as best we can and join together as we do that work. So yes and yes and yes to everything you said, Regina. Let's keep working on it. In the meantime, Tim, I want to come back to you and ask you, what were some of the big picture dreams, ideas that you had that came out of this or were reaffirmed by this experience of General Convention? Tim?
All right. Yeah, Katie and I had kicked around a few things, and yeah, she said, why don't you share some, like, big picture dreams? So I appreciate that question, Tom. And but I like I brainstorm a lot around this because, you know, I've seen what church planting and redevelopment has been able to do in Oklahoma, and I want us to be more, not aggressive, even just bolder. Bolder is the right word. More bold in the church at large in this. And a quick comment. I agree, Eric, that it would have been awesome if we had talked about this on the floor a bit. We talked about so much. We talked so much about rules of order that I almost lost my mind. I'm gonna we probably need to talk to the president of the House of Deputies and talk to a few. We need to figure out a way to do this different. Um, Hopefully we have less rules of order and canon stuff next time so that we can do that and talk more about some of this important work. But ultimately, the General Convention is not going to be the lead driver for this work, and it doesn't need to be. And sometimes we put it on the General Convention to solve this problem or whatever, or we lump more and say we need the tech staff to fix this, and this is a massive challenge for the whole church, and so it takes all this grassroots work and local work and anyway, so a couple things that relate to some of the comments that have been in the chat. I would love to see us. My diocese just recently did this. We passed. We created a fund and for within our diocese, so that any property that is sold in our diocese goes into a fund for planting new churches. Because I've heard horror stories about a couple of things. One is churches closing and being sold for bottom dollar instead of top dollar. And then that money being lumped into the diocesan operating budget and really squandered quickly. And one of you mentioned that, just thrown in the operating budget. I can't remember which one. But that's awful practice. It's just as bad as spending 20% of your endowment in a year. You know, it's wasting that asset. So that's a thing that I think every diocese could do that could help in this area, and set aside some funds for this work. I think we do have some financing issues. Teresa, you mentioned that, like, where do we get money? I know for us, when we built our first facility here at Grace Church in Yukon, we went to the Episcopal Church Building Fund, and we got a way more competitive loan than a traditional bank. They gave us a great interest rate. It was interest only for the first 3 years, which we're still in that period. And they also gave us this option that as we make big pay downs, they will re-amortize it, which is huge, right? Because so much when especially if you're a kind of a traditional church plant, time is money and money is mission. So like it all, like how you're staffing for growth and how you're able to do things depends so much on this. And so ECBF was able to give us some really generous terms. Honestly, they need more capital in order to offer more loans like that. And so I have this wild idea. I'm talking to people at we're talking to Trinity's mission. Oh goodness, what's their name? The Mission Real Estate Development Fund. We're talking with the Episcopal Parish Network about how can we perhaps leverage some endowments and stuff to create kind of like an Episcopal Church real estate investment trust, like an REIT. And so REITs are part of an investment portfolio that generate a return. So if you've got a church with a $10 million endowment, well, maybe they want to put $500,000 in this fund, and that $500,000 can be capital made available for a new building project. And then the congregation is going to pay an interest rate back to a return to those investors. So it's still legal, but it could be with a lot better, perhaps, interest rate than what you might find on an open market. So how do we unlock our endowments and our capital resources in ways that we can leverage those for mission and ministry? I'm not I'm like a idea person. I have no idea how to legally and do that. So next we gotta talk to like the lawyers and the financial experts. But that's a wild idea that I have. That was what I was asked to bring as the wild idea. So I don't know how to make that happen, but it seems like there should be a way to do something like that. I think all of our churches, established churches, new church plants, redevelopment, everybody needs to be thinking about a business plan, how they can provide some resource to the community that still generates some return. And so I know some churches are doing, and Rebecca is really passionate about this. Where is she? Rebecca, you are really passionate about housing projects, right? I know a lot of churches, there's some in California doing that, I believe, and up in Seattle area. So that is a way that we can help provide affordable housing using our land assets that generate a return for mission and ministry. Not exorbitant, but it's something that's still significant. But so whether it's land resources or building resources, anytime that our buildings are vacant, how can we create business plans that generate some revenue for mission and ministry? I think we are going to have to be even more creative in that over the next couple decades, and have legitimate business plans as churches. And then what I would like to, my biggest, wildest idea, is that I think we need a bolder vision for church planting across tech, and how tech can partner with diocese for this work. We need an audacious goal. I think it is, I don't think I'm too far off that we may well close 1,000 churches over the next decade, next 10 to 15 years, 1,000 churches. Could we plant 100 churches nationwide over a decade that are kind of more, 100 traditional church plants and 100 kind of more missional communities? I think we could do both, that are reaching our neighborhoods, and especially put those 100 traditional church plants in places that could become parishes. And parish, like I want we're just a little bit from becoming a parish here at Grace Church. And then I'm thinking already, what's our first missional community that we can plant out of Grace Church? But so if we have 100 traditional churches that are in good areas and thriving, I actually think we might grow numerically, even if we close 1,000. If we close 1,000 churches with an average attendance of 30 to 40 people, which I think is the average ASA now across the church, but we plant 100 that could have 150 to 200 people, we would actually grow as a denomination. And so why not put out an audacious goal and say what we think that would cost, and see if we can get Executive Council and General Convention to set aside that grant money over several trienniums. And then we got to get the diocese to have the matching funds to really make that go. You can't run this just through tech. We've got to have the diocesan investments, and get back to doing some of this work. And so we'll have to figure out how to make both those go. But I think we need an audacious goal. And then just to dream a little bit bigger and bolder about what's possible. A lot of church plants that I know are stuck in the 30 to 50 people range. And I think we can get some of them even larger with the right resourcing and plans. And I think we have to have a vision and focus that says that we can do more, and we can grow them to an even more sustainable size. Not every church is going to be 150 to 200 on a Sunday, but I think there's a lot of viable areas nationwide where that could be, that we do not have an Episcopal presence. And so that's what I think we really need to look at the map and figure that out, where those could be. And 500 revitalized churches, absolutely. So those are some of my big dreams, Tom and Katie.
I would say, Tim, of course, the PC USA has had a goal of planting 1,001 new worshiping communities over the last decade. And Bishop Rick Thorpe told me that Church of England, I think he said their goal is 10,000. I don't know what the time period on that is.
Yeah.
Pretty amazing.
Maybe 100 is not even big enough, but I don't think we have a defined goal right now.
Mm.
So maybe I just need one. We need a starting place and to put that out there. That could be the advisory group's resolution at the next general convention.
Love it. Rebecca, you
Beautiful.
said a couple of times in the chat box that Diocese of North Carolina has been up to something. Would you share what that is?
Yes, the diocese sold their downtown office building last year, or the sale was actually finalized, I think early this year. And in the process, they cleared $8.8 million. That's after all the closing costs and everything. They put 3.8 million into a fund that is basically an investment fund. But the 5 million they put into a program that the first 3 million is being released to churches that have struggled, to historically African American churches, very small churches, churches that have major, that have seen a drop off in congregation, but that are primed for redevelopment, but may have significant building issues. And those funds are going to be they're going to be released in November of this year, that first 3 million. And then the next 2 million are going to be released to, but the target for that first 3 million is congregations who have annual budgets of less than $100,000, which is, an awful lot more churches than have budgets over $100,000. And it's just, it shows, I think it shows a tremendous amount of foresight and commitment to, to recognize that a diocese can do something with building fund. When they sell property, they can do something with it because it's all going to go. I mean, not the whole 8.8 million, but 5 million of the 8.8 million is going to go out to churches for redevelopment work, for, probably for helping support some new church plants or spinoffs. But it's really exciting.
It is exciting, and the Diocese of North Carolina has had to tighten its belt and host some local conversations where they develop the goodwill, the collective will to act in such bold ways. I mean, it was really lovely to have Bishop Michael Curry as a bishop as long as they did. And they had new opportunities for a new day, and they needed a new group of leaders to come forward. And that's the work, I think, that made that collective goodwill possible. Katie and I and Steve and Sarah, the paid staff on the presiding bishop's team, we are not able to speak to these. We're not able to set goals. We're not able to influence legislation. Once in a while, we're called on to testify and share stories about what we've learned in this work. But it's really going to be you on the call here today, going to your local bishops and canons and your deanery meetings and saying, it's time for us to have a different kind of conversation. Just as Tim was saying, General Convention needs to change. So do our diocesan conventions. That's where a lot of this impetus for Madam President, thank you, President, Secretary, Convention, all of those formalities, we sustain that. We keep that going, where we can have 4.5 hours of conversation about the rules of order. Oh my, I seriously doubt Jesus would be anywhere but on the back loading dock having a smoke with one of the workers back there at that point. Seriously, come on. But we continue to sustain that, even in our own diocesan conventions. Let me tell you, if you gave Katie Nakamura Rengers 5 minutes behind a microphone in general convention open session, plenary session, she would get them to come up with an audacious goal around church planting and ministry redevelopment in 5 minutes. You know why we're not invited to do it? You know why we're not invited to do it. Exactly. So it's not for the lack of imagination. It's not for the lack of collective desire. We do have some structures and practices in place that gradually need to be dismantled, frankly, so that we have the space to speak honestly to each other about the fact that we have more than enough resources to do this work. We have more than enough. It's the question is this really important to us? And if you feel like it is, it's time to speak up. That's my solid, I very rarely speak this way, but it's my solid conviction that it's time to speak this way. So
Yeah.
I'll stop there. Back to you, Tim.
Can I say one more thing on that? Like,
Please.
just echoing that, like, I think all the like ministry priorities that we name at General, none of them are unimportant. But if we don't have thriving congregations who are putting those ministry priorities into practice in their local communities, it does not matter what gets passed at General Convention. And so much of the money and resources that we spend at that level just do not move the needle of the kingdom of God work that we are really called to do. And so honestly, a lot of things that we end up funding at General Convention might not need to be funded through the General Convention or through tech, especially if we literally don't have congregation. Like, think about 25 years from now, if we don't have Episcopalians to do the work. And that's why people say the people will run out before the money. So.
Tim, thank you so much. And thanks to you all who are part of this conversation and who have contributed in the chat box and in so many of the other conversations that are happening, the ones that we're part of and the ones you're hosting in your diocese. As we wrap up, just a few things for you. I just put in the chat box, you might have to scroll up a little bit. The Reverend Isaac Martinez from the Diocese of Massachusetts was the co-chair, along with Eric, of that legislative committee on evangelism and the future church. And he wasn't able to be with us today, but he did make a short video. So if you want to just copy and save that link, we'll distribute it in another way as well. He's happy for it to be shared. It's kind of like the four gospels. He's essentially saying the same thing that Tim just said and that Eric Matoye has said, but in different words and with some different emphases. So you might find that really interesting. A few folks have put in the chat box that we've got a lot of events coming up. Some of them are sponsored by our Church Planting and Redevelopment Office and others by our friends and partners in this work. So the two that I know of before the end of the year, there is a conference, the New Day Conference. That is not hosted by us. It's by a group called the Living Waters Collective. Amazing group. I will be there. I support everything they do. A lot of folk from the Diocese of Upper Michigan that have been experimenting with mutual ministry and other dioceses that are really trying to change the culture and the language and the strategy and the heart, honestly, around the ways that we do ministry. So there's a number of panel conversations around living on the edge, local vitality, challenging boundaries, how we gather, equipping leaders, music that makes community, et cetera. That's part of that. Before I finish, I'll see if I can put the flyer into the chat box, or maybe you can, Steve. So that's September 16th through 19th in Minneapolis. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be a little bigger, probably around, between 50 and 100 participants. And then we are hosting another Genesis gathering. That is the same thing as the practicing possibilities, that we're going to be practicing possibilities at the Genesis gathering, as Tom was saying earlier. That is hosted by our office, Church Planting and Redevelopment, CPNR, and it will be October the 28th through 31st. That is a smaller gathering, so that's more like 30, 35 folks, and we are prioritizing Province 1, just because we never host anything in Province 1, or we haven't in the last few years since COVID. General registration may open in about a month or so for that if you're not part of Province 1 or those kind of surrounding dioceses. Why might you choose one over the other? They're both going to be amazing. So dates and locations, that's all I would say. Yeah.
This is a remarkable gathering of people here. I'm going to jump in and ask if you have a particular gift or area of expertise that you'd like to offer to this group. Would you mind just giving us a real brief introduction to that in the chat right now, just so that people know who's here? And I'm going to do a really risky thing by naming a couple of people who are super bashful about identifying and owning the incredible giftedness that they bring to all of our gatherings. So I want to first of all name Robin Pierre, who's doing amazing ministry with the Haitian population in the New Jersey, New York area, making amazing ministry available to people with very little funding and support, largely because we, as still a dominant culture denomination, are still learning what it means to be present to our Haitian brothers and sisters. So Robin, I give God thanks for you every day, and I offer a deep bow to your ministries, to all of us and to the future of our church. Thank you for joining us today. And I know I'm going to be leaving people out, so please put your descriptions of your particular gifts for the group in the chat, but I'm going to keep going. Clive is coming along and demonstrating with his ministry. Clive Sampson, also here. Thank you, Clive, for joining us, demonstrating how we fund ministries, not only with money, but with social capital built on relationships with people outside the church to create partnerships that support not only our typical age, but young people new to the country, young people that have been here for a while, building networks of support to sustain hope, especially for people whose future is uncertain. Clive, thank you for your ministries to all of us and that beautiful work that you're doing. And I could just keep going like this. I mean, on and on and on. You all are an amazing group. Steve Godfrey just made a huge move with his life and career to go back to a group of people who are in a really vital everyday way practicing a lay-led clergy-supported movement that teaches fish how to swim again. It's pretty amazing. And I love the courage that you've exhibited to return to Northern Michigan or to go to Northern Michigan at this point in your life, Steve. So thank you for being such a living example of living and ministering from a place of courage and hope, Steve. Thank you. And it just goes on. I mean, I could just say so much about each of you. I remember a recent conversation where Sarah Fisher in Portland, Oregon said, I came to this point in my life where I realized I'm here to serve the people out there in the community, and I'm going to bring the church along behind me to do that. I'm not here to serve the diocese or the bishop or even diocesan staff. I'm here to serve the people that Jesus cares about out on the streets, out in the community. So thank you, Sarah, for your courage. And I know the story is being written as we talk, and there's not a chapter yet to read on this moment in your life, but I thank you for your courage and the standard of excellence that you're holding all of us to in ministry. Thank you for that. And then it goes on and on. I mean, Carl, you're doing amazing ministry there in the metropolitan New York area, really kind of innovating. What does it mean to engage people that you would never expect to find in church on Sunday mornings? And what does it mean to share the gospel in ways that feels like good news to them? My deep bow to you in this work as well. So you all may not be speaking up and marketing and branding your ministries in the ways that the traditional church would expect you to, but we see what you're doing. And I love this group to know of the huge gifts and resources that you have to offer. And I could spend the next hour doing the same thing with so many of you here. So when I miss you, please go ahead and put your gifts and ministry and links to your ministry in the chat. It's a really powerful gift when we start to connect with each other. I'll stop. Katie, back to you.
No, I was gonna just say what a beautiful note to end on, Tom. And thanks to you all. Please keep on adding those in the chat box and we'll click save at the end so that we don't lose those. Our hour is up, but stay tuned to our newsletters and email updates, and we'll be putting out some topics for, are we in almost in August already? For August and September coming up here soon. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to hearing from you in the in-between. Right. Take care.
We're going to stay on if you have questions.
Mhm.
Thanks for being with us. Sweet. Katie, you want to save the chat?
I sure will.
All right. And we're going to turn off the recording in case any of you have any questions or follow up on this. Thank you for joining us.